Welcome. In this episode, we are going to continue our study of the Protestant Reformation. We will do so by turning from the Reformation surrounding Luther in Germany to the Reformation surrounding Henry VIII, King of England. If we were in class, I would give you an overview of some Roman numerals, but we won't. Instead, the background for the Reformation in England goes back to the War of the Roses, which is a war of dynastic succession in England. The issue in England is that if you go back to the 1300s, the family name were the Plantagenets, and King Edward III died. His oldest son had died, but his oldest grandson reigned for a time. But Richard II had no children, so it passed to a younger son's line. Remember that wars of dynastic succession rarely happen if, when the old king dies, he has an adult, healthy son, about whom, legitimacy is not an issue, and they sort of know who his parents are, and everything is hunky-dory. But if the king has only a daughter, or no children, or only has a son or more, but they are very young, or they have some type of health or mental problems, then some other relatives often can, not always, but can use that as an excuse to launch a war of dynastic succession where they challenge who the rightful king should be, and these are relatively common, of which the Wars of the Roses are one. So Henry IV becomes king, and then Henry V, who wins a war against France, actually conquers big chunks of France for England, but then he dies in France at a pretty young age, in the prime of life. His son Henry VI becomes king and is largely well-liked, but develops health and mental problems. The problem being he would develop into almost a comatose state where he would sort of be helpless for long periods of time, and they really had no idea what was wrong with him or how to help him out of it, and then he would suddenly snap out of it and seemingly be fine for long stretches of time. At any rate, this was a reason that some other distant relatives, who were basically cousins, challenged Henry to the throne, and there was fighting back and forth, and it was won by their younger cousins, the family of York. Right? These were the Lancastrians, and these were the Yorkists. And Richard, Duke of York, also called Richard Plantagenet, wins, but he dies in battle. And his oldest son, Edward, becomes king and rules for 20 years. But when he dies, his child son, Edward, becomes named king, with the old dead king's younger brother, Richard, named Lord Protector. Richard abuses this power, and most historians believe kills both of the sons, both of his nephews of his brother, and seizes the power to be king. It's at this point that these Wars of the Roses have been going on for so long, and remember that noblemen were the leaders. They were the knights in these armies, and they were routinely killed on the field of battle. So they're actually running out of relatives who are related to the king. So Richard feels pretty secure. But there's this one other guy out there named Henry Tudor, or who will be Henry VII. And his claim to the throne, he's not directly related to any of these people. Where does Henry VII come from? Well, Henry VII's grandmother was married to Henry V. Remember, he died in battle at a young age. So his wife was young enough to remarry and have a son with another man named, I believe, Owen Tudor. And then Owen Tudor had Edmund Tudor. Edmund Tudor had Henry Tudor. And Henry will eventually marry the daughter of this dead Edward, who also had a daughter, as a way to reunite the houses of Lancaster and York and form the House of Tudor. At any rate, this Henry, who will be Henry VII, defeats Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485 and becomes King Henry VII. Now, one of the biggest things that Henry VII is paranoid about is another war of dynastic succession. He has 2 sons and 2 daughters that survive childbirth and survive young childhood, and he feels pretty good about that. But he is always paranoid and worried about a war of dynastic succession because, remember, he's really not entirely related to the previous kings. He kind of won a battle against the king where the king died, and he becomes the king. There are some other cousins from this family. There are more complicated family trees with more relatives who are out there who have a better blood claim to be the rightful king. And those people are out there. So Henry VII is really paranoid about who might be coming to get him. But he has 4 sons, and his oldest son, the one who is in line to be king, he names Arthur, hoping that people don't lose the irony. Like there hasn't, other than the mythical King Arthur, there hasn't been a King Arthur of England. And so he was trying to make his son maybe Arthur the First, or maybe he would call him Arthur the Second, because they would all just kind of wink and pretend that there was a real King Arthur. And so he was trying to make his son out to be this larger than life myth. And one of the next things that a king is to do is to try to arrange a marriage for his children to secure alliances with other countries. Most noble people were very limited in who they could marry, and most of their marriages were arranged, and arranged from the time they were quite young. And so Henry VII tries really hard to arrange marriages for all of his children. Here's another family tree. Don't get too zonked out on this, but here's Henry VII. He marries Queen Elizabeth of York, of that other family that reunited the 2 warring families from the Wars of the Roses. Henry VII had 4 children, 2 sons, 2 daughters. He has an oldest son, Prince Arthur. He names his second son Henry. He has a daughter named Margaret and a daughter named Mary. Prince Arthur, he marries off to the beautiful young Spanish princess Catherine of Aragon, which is, she's a niece, or excuse me, she's the daughter of the King and Queen of Spain. He has a daughter named Margaret, whom he marries off to King James IV of Scotland. As an example of the times, he sends his daughter Margaret at age 13 to marry the 42-year-old King James, and they have a child less than 2 years later. Yeah. He also sends his young daughter Mary to France to marry the son of the King of France. So he's arranging all of these sweet marriages for his children, but tragedy strikes as Arthur and the Spanish princess Catherine get married. They're like on part of their 6-month honeymoon. Arthur was young. He was, I want to say about 15, maybe 16, and his beautiful Spanish princess was, say, 19, maybe 21, a little older. And Arthur dies. He dies, and they haven't had children, and they've only been married a short time, and disaster strikes because he was the heir. The alliance with Spain is in trouble, and so Henry VII does a quick thinking act and wants his other son to step in and marry his dead older brother's widow. If you think that's gross, you're not alone. In fact, there were laws against that, and there was canon law or church law against that. They could not get a church marriage because that was considered incestuous. That was considered too close of a relationship, because Catherine and Henry's brother were married. She is Henry's own sister-in-law, which is like having a sister, and therefore them to get married is like marrying your sister-in-law, which is a little like marrying your sister, which was considered incestuous and illegal. And if you didn't have a church marriage, then your children would not be recognized as future kings. So that wouldn't solve the problem. So Henry VII concocts the story and swears under oath that here's the deal, that even though Arthur and Catherine were married for 6 months, Arthur was only 15, and that he and Catherine never consummated their marriage, and therefore the marriage never took full effect. Therefore, they were never fully married. Therefore, Henry and Catherine are not brother and sister. Therefore, they can freely marry. He has to get special permission from the Pope to get this declared in the church, like the official church documents, and gets a special dispensation to say that this marriage between Arthur and Catherine was null and void, because even though they were alone for 6 months, they say, Arthur was only 15, and so they probably never consummated the marriage. And Henry swears on it, and the Pope grants him that dispensation, which the church was usually keen to do. If a king, and often money was attached, and often their royal honor was attached, they granted it. So now Henry VIII, Henry VII's younger son, is married to Catherine of Aragon. At this time is when Luther, in 1517, and his 95 Theses is taking off. So then Henry VII dies, and Henry VIII and his wife, Catherine of Aragon, become King and Queen of England. And they are devout defenders of the Catholic Church. The Pope even names Henry VIII the defender of the faith in 1521. Henry VIII co-writes a book in defense of the seven sacraments with his nobleman, his prime minister, or soon-to-be chancellor, Thomas More. This defense of the seven sacraments is a defense of the Catholic Church against all the Protestant teachings and all the things Luther said. And so Henry VIII, at this point, is a very devout Catholic and is looking to challenge the Lutherans and to continue in his Catholic faith. However, he does not have a son. What you see is that with his wife, Catherine of Aragon, she has several children, all of whom die except for a daughter, Mary. And with only a daughter, and then Catherine stops getting pregnant and gets a little older, and this begins to worry King Henry. No woman had ever inherited the throne as queen in her own right up to that point. And Henry VIII is worried that the minute he dies, another war will break out, and everyone in his family will be killed, and his dynasty will be snuffed out. He very much wants a son and heir. And so Henry now takes it to the Pope that this business with his brother was a lie. You know, I think dear old dad maybe didn't know. Maybe he was lying. I don't know. But I know my red-blooded older brother, and he and my wife certainly consummated that marriage. Therefore, our marriage is illegal, incestuous, and that is why, in Henry's words, God is punishing me by not giving me a son, is because I am committing incest with my brother's widow. Therefore, the church must allow me another special dispensation to get rid of my wife, because remember, the Catholic Church takes the words of Jesus from the Bible seriously on divorce, that divorce is not permitted under any circumstances. Only, again, an annulment, a marriage can be declared null and void if there was some reason it was defective. And so in the way that Arthur and Catherine's marriage was defective because they had never consummated it, that's at least what they told them and the church agreed to believe, King Henry was arguing, no, that dispensation was defective because they really were man and wife, therefore she's really my sister, therefore we can't be married. However, at this point, the church is in a different situation. For one, they're not inclined to grant one dispensation and then take it back 20 years later. More importantly, Catherine of Aragon has a very important relative. Her nephew is Emperor Charles V. Catherine of Aragon's nephew is Emperor Charles V, who is sort of the Pope's right-hand man, and in many ways kind of controlling the Pope a bit, because he's the emperor with a massive army in Germany and in Spain. He inherited a huge empire from many of his grandparents, and Emperor Charles V pressures the Pope to deny this because, again, divorce is not permitted and frowned upon. And so if Henry effectively divorces Catherine, she's being kicked to the curb and treated like trash. She's being accused of knowingly committing incest with him. Henry would argue, oh, my dad set it up, my brother died, she knew about it, she knew that it was incest and did it anyway. And so she is being entirely thrown under the bus by this thing, and her nephew is the most powerful man in the world. And her nephew also has a lot of influence with the Pope. And so the Pope refuses this special dispensation and insists that this marriage is valid, leaving Henry grasping for an heir, for a son to whom he could leave the throne, which is where we will pick up next time. Thanks for watching.